It's not a coincidence that there are a lot of couples who have at least one higher needs child that end up separating, because it puts a lot of stress on us personally and then on the couple, of course. And we have to find ways to deal with it. And a lot of times we can't communicate about what it is that we're feeling.
Welcome to This Way Up, the podcast dedicated to supporting parents and caregivers navigating the complex world of mental health. I'm Andrea, and each episode we dive deep into the conversations that matter, exploring the challenges, triumphs, and transformative journeys of those facing mental health struggles within their families. Whether you're here for expert advice, inspiring stories, or just a little boost to get you through the day, we've got you covered. So grab a cup of coffee, kick back, and join us as we find the bright spots in the mental health journey, because we're all climbing our way up together. It is no secret that one of the hardest things on a relationship is parenthood. And when we become parents, we change as people. Well, today's guest, Marcella Kaplani, is a psychologist with over 15 years of experience, and she has dedicated her practice to something that I never have heard of before. It's called Matrescence Patrescence, which is the psychological process and transition that humans make when they become parents. So she helps us understand and normalize what are some of the emotions that we have and changes that we have as mothers and fathers when we become parents. She helps us identify some common pitfalls that many encounter. And then she gives us some very simple steps that we can take to help preserve and maybe repair the relationships that sometimes get damaged when we are going through these changes. So I hope that you enjoy this episode. And if you do, please hit the like button and subscribe and share with all your friends. So welcome, Markella.
Very nice to be here. Hi.
Hi there. Well, today we are going to be talking about adulting, parenting, and relationships. And we all know that adulting is difficult enough, let alone layer on a partner and then parenting a child with higher needs. And you've got yourself a recipe for a lot of stress. So hopefully you can give us some tips on how to maybe reduce that stress and, work through a relationship to preserve that relationship that started this whole parenting thing.
Right. There are a lot of layers. And the first one being that we change so much as we become parents. And it's something that we don't necessarily realize. Not a lot of people are talking about matrescence and patrescence, which are basically the rite of passage into motherhood and fatherhood, respectively, that really change who we are. They change our identity. And so it's inevitable if I change as a person, if my entire identity changes, it shifts so that everything, all of my other roles are going to accommodate this new identity that I am forming, that of course, this is going to affect how I interact with my partner and then how I'm going to interact with my children as well, versus what I thought I was going to do, what I hoped I was going to do as a parent. And layer that on if there is some kind of a special need or something that I wasn't necessarily expecting to deal with.
So what are some of the common transitions that you see from women and men as they transition into parenthood?
From women, the first thing that I see is a loss of self. That's the first symptom, I guess, that you would call it, of matrescence, because when we don't recognize that this is going to happen, a lot of times we get shocked. And I was one of those women who got very shocked. And even though I am a psychologist and I had worked with parents before and I've worked with children, and at the very least, I expected it to be tough. I didn't expect that I was going to get some kind of a free pass because of my experience. I, on the contrary, really expected that it was going to be very hard. And I was going into motherhood very humbled by the experience that I was seeing other parents having. But nobody was really talking about matrescence and that loss of identity. And there's a lot of hush-hush about this, about the way that we change. In fact, we really talk about going back to normal, and we make that be the ultimate goal to go back to normal, to go back to how our relationship used to be. All these things are what we hear all around. And so for me, what really hit me when I got into motherhood was that loss of the sense of self, the loss of my identity. Who am I now? And I love being a mom, but is that all I am? And when I do something different that's not related to motherhood, I feel guilty. Why is that? I never used to feel guilt or shame. And so there was a lot that I had to slowly start to work through so that I can understand what was happening. And that's kind of how I ran into the term matrescence. That's how I discovered it. Matrescence basically is going to really change the way that we think and how we feel. It even changes our brain wiring. It's been detected that we literally start to think in we versus me. Our brain develops certain neural pathways that make us be much more empathetic. They make us be much more compassionate. And we think in terms of society way differently than we used to think before. It's not like we used to be selfish before, but we definitely think in different ways now because now we're wired to protect another human being, our little one.
So real quickly, that happens to the woman.
Yeah.
Does that happen to the man? Or is he still wired the same that he was pre-kid?
So as little research as is being done on matrescence and women's psychology in motherhood, there's even less being done on patrescence, and patrescence is even less talked about. However, there is some research showing that for fathers, the brain wiring changes temporarily if they spend some time with the baby in the beginning. But for the few fathers who have the opportunity and capacity to be there much more actively and for a longer period of time, there is now growing evidence that their brain wiring will also potentially change, even permanently in some areas. But what has been seen up until now is that there is this temporary shift. There are some hormonal changes that happen in men as well. And this can be amplified if men do have the opportunity to spend more time with their children. So connection matters.
Wow. So when I had my kids, they had FMLA here in the States. It is where you get a certain period of time. You get 6 weeks off and then you can extend it to, I think it's like 3 or 4 months. It's nothing like Europe. But they didn't have paternity leave. My husband I had the baby and he went to work the next day. But interestingly enough, now they've got paternity leave. And by what I'm hearing really is that it is important for the male, if he can, to stay home and spend some time as a family unit right after childbirth.
And it's important for the father's psychology as well, because a lot of times we talk about the child and everything becomes baby-centered, child-centered after we have children. But this is for men to also deal with their own changes, because there is such a thing as a rite of passage into fatherhood, and men will also change. And one of the problems that men face, which is contrary to women, is that they are expected to maintain their old life, and there is no expectation that they should change. Whereas with mothers, what becomes a problem a lot of times is that there's an expectation that they're supposed to have this huge change, and that they're supposed to be extremely happy and joyful all the time within this shift that they're experiencing. You have the exact opposite for men, where they start to experience internally a shift. They start to experience their priorities changing. They start to feel pressure to provide more so than they may have felt, because now women also work and we are in a more, or so hopefully, more equal terms in our relationship. But then when children come along, that hasn't necessarily been resolved. The man will feel like he has more pressure, while simultaneously feeling like I'm changing and my priorities are changing and I want to spend more time with my children. But what does society show me? That I'm supposed to go like life as normal, as nothing happened. Like you said, your husband was supposed to go to work the next day as if nothing had happened. And so this clashes with their own internal change. And this clash creates turmoil, which then will create turmoil in the relationship as well. So she's experiencing her own change, which she's not accustomed to. Nobody has talked about it. She's not expecting. She's supposed to go back to normal while loving motherhood in its entirety and not needing anything else. So I don't know how these two are supposed to coincide. Whereas then he is also experiencing the turmoil because there's something else externally being said and something completely different happening internally.
I've had a few friends confide in me after they've had their child, and my heart goes out to them. They're just like, I'm not happy. I'm supposed to be joyful that I had this baby, and I'm not happy. I didn't fall in love with her right away. I can only imagine that that's got to be a conflict of losing your old self and then stress of trying to provide for somebody else. I mean, the connections don't, like you said, I think there's this societal dream that we make. Boom, you have a baby and like you've got a beautiful family and everything is just so happy. Or there's a joke that you never get any sleep, but nobody's really talking about, okay, yeah, you may be tired and your body is trying to heal, but you really are in a transition period of losing. That old you is somewhat dying. Yes, it's changing, but you can't go back to who you were the day before birth, ever.
Exactly. And nobody talks about this grief. We're not supposed to talk about it. In fact, I think before we can ever discuss it, we get comments like, didn't you just fall in love with him or her from the minute that you saw them? Who can answer no? Who can directly just say, no, it wasn't love at first sight. I was just very confused. I was expecting it theoretically, but when I held him in my arms, there was this kind of like, oh, wow, what do I do now? Who am I now? Yes, or panic, or so many things, or nothing. Maybe there's no emotion at all. And how okay is it to say, I didn't feel anything. I was numb. So, but we come with this excitement. Oh, isn't it just love at first sight and how adorable? And so we don't give mothers, especially, the opportunity to open up and say, gosh, I don't know how I felt. Oh, it took me a few months before I felt like I was really in this and really in love with my child.
Well, and it is hard because your children don't have personalities until they get a little bit older, right? I mean, you eventually, like, you see them smile and you're seeing them grow, and that love grows over time. And as a parent talking to a new parent, we're coming from that perspective of being able to have lived through all of that growth of love, right? We're seeing the end, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. They're right here during the storm. They haven't yet experienced that pot of gold.
Yes.
I have this picture of my husband holding my newborn son, our newborn son, I should say. We're at the hospital and he's got this look. He's purely terrified. He can't even like comfortably hold him. He's just like, oh my God. And I joke about it because it was so funny, but that expression was everything that he felt, I'm sure. And you said that, from a women's standpoint, we can understand it, but I never really thought of it that, oh my God, now he's holding and he's going, I have got to make sure that I make it. I've got to make sure that I can't just walk off the job. I can't just leave my wife. I've got to be here to provide for this little guy.
Right. And this can either help you develop or it can help you feel very trapped. Mm-hmm. And then very stuck. And so when we don't recognize that these are normal feelings and we don't validate them, we don't normalize them, we don't talk about them, we actually get very stuck in this phase of trying to go back in lack of flexibility, lack of acceptance of what is going on. And so as long as we resist, we begin to feel very trapped. And it has been found that a lot of times women will experience, but even men, postpartum depression. And a lot of times it is linked to the fact that we are resisting this process of matrescence or patrescence. We don't talk about it. We don't know it. We, in fact, are told to go back to normal. And so we resist with all our or might. And this resistance to the inevitable change is what causes us to be anxious or to be depressed within motherhood or fatherhood. Whereas if this was normalized, if we knew it was bound to happen, if we were allowed without guilt and shame to feel the grief that comes with shedding the old self, then we would think, oh, hey, just like the phoenix, something more beautiful is going to come out of this. And it's not going to be just being a parent, but it is for a little while going to be the center of everything before I start to figure out how everything else fits in.
Wow. I mean, even in my short, very, very short 53 years, society has come to a place where we have found the benefits of talking more about things and not being so alone in these thoughts and these feelings. We know that it's hard. We know that there's changes happening, but when I was having children, it was, okay, well, I'm just going to fight through it. I'm just going to go through it. And then you have feeling compounded upon feeling. Then you have argument compounded upon argument. And then nothing ever resolves, or it finally resolves, but it seems to take so many years to get to the point of resolution because there's no understanding from the very beginning what we're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of couples wait even now for the kids to grow up. I have got to power through. This is just how it's going to be. And so in this way, there's the other side of the coin where we normalize certain things when basically what we're doing is we are just sucking it up and we're telling ourselves that we just have to endure this because this is just how it is for all couples, for all parents. It's tough. And all couples are going to have communication issues after children. And so it's fine. And so I was actually recording an episode for my own podcast today, and I was talking exactly about this trap. So there's the one side that says, oh, it's only us. We are the only ones experiencing this. Everyone in our cycle seems to be doing fine. And there's that where it doesn't let us deal with the problem because we think, oh my, it's just me and I can't talk about it. So if we can't talk about it, there's shame involved. We don't actually seek help most of the time, or we seek it very late. And so there's this statistic where it basically says couples will go to couples therapy 6 to 7 years late. So the issues have started way before. And when couples therapy was going to be actually effective, that was 6 and 7 years ago. And they come at a stage where there is potentially no return. Thankfully, in a lot of cases there is, but there's a reason why. And then the other side of the coin is, oh, yes, I have seen a lot of couples face this. Oh, yes, people are talking around me about the fact that they're having difficulty in their marriage ever since children. Oh, this is what's supposed to happen. So we'll weather the storm and we'll come out of it okay, hopefully. Or otherwise, well, the kids will have separated us, will have been the reason that we separate. And we kind of just relinquish control altogether. We don't recognize our responsibility and the power that we have within this, and we do nothing. Whereas a healthier middle is, it does happen to other people. It actually happens even to the healthiest couples that their communication will break down after children because I am changing, you are changing. So our dynamic is changing. But we can do something about it. We can prevent it. It's not inevitable.
I think that What to Expect When You're Expecting book, I don't know, you have it there too. They should really have it talking about relationships. It's so focused on the baby. How do you nurse? How do you do this? There really should be one, What to Expect in Relationships. There's just so much complexity that goes along with being a parent. So now you're past that birthing stage, whatever. Now you're into a pattern. What are some common pitfalls that you're seeing with couples during parenthood?
Okay, so we're talking about a stage where we're even past toddlerhood, for example.
I would say, okay, let me ask you this. It sounds like there might be different pitfalls for different stages of child development.
There could be, yes, because matrescence and patrescence, they actually follow the developmental stages of our children. And so every time our child enters a different stage of life, we are also learning with them, especially with the firstborn, because we've never been through that stage. So it's a completely different phase for us. And we are being called to be different things for this different stage of our child. And so again, there's a transition happening. Matrescence begins at conception, many say. I say at the moment we even consider conceiving. So even childless couple that, however, was trying and was really hoping to become parents, they themselves have entered a phase of matrescence and a phase of grief of the self that they were going to become. But going into couples that did have their children, they will never get out of matrescence and patrescence. That's an ongoing process. You're always going to be there and it's always going to be changing. So the empty nest syndrome is part of matrescence and patrescence because I'm also then again adjusting who I am in relation to my adult children now who have left the home and who they are and what I am to their lives now that they're getting married. So different stages for the child means different stages for us personally and us as a couple. And so common pitfalls in general are that I start to change, you start to change, we don't talk about it. The biggest issue that I see with couples is that we start talking about logistics a lot.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
very normal. It's going to happen. And we're going to wonder, like, did you get the diapers? Did you book the pediatrician? Are you going to go to the store? Who's cooking dinner tonight? And all these things. And we're very sleepless and we are very exhausted. And it feels like going into any other type of conversation is just killing the very little energy we've got left. If we've got any left, we are running on fumes. And so we stop being curious about one another. We start to take each other for granted. I know you now. I learned all there is to learn about you. And so when we used to go on dates in the beginning, we wanted to discover one another. And maybe we've been years together, but we feel like, oh, wow, I find out new things about you all the time. But then that curiosity is gone after children. We don't have the capacity, but we don't try to rebuild it either. So at the newborn stage, you're not going to have the capacity. It's not realistic when we tell couples have date nights. There's very few couples that are able to have those. There are, but there's very few. And even here in Greece, where it is much more accustomed to have grandparents taking over, for a lot of people, even here with this extra support, they are not very ready to leave the children and go on date nights. Sometimes it's because they want to be very involved. They don't want too much involvement externally. And then there's a control issue there. That's a whole other thing. And sometimes it's because by the time that I'm ready to ask for support, we've already grown in distance so much that it is easier for us to stay the way we are and have the children as an excuse rather than to just start to become curious again, because now I have to consciously do this. So then a second pitfall that I would say is that we rely on love way more than we should. And what do I mean by that? We think that love is enough. The love that we had and have for each other should be enough to maintain the relationship. And we don't seem to think that way for any kind of other relationship. So with our friends, we understand that we need to put in the time. Even those really close friends that we think that, oh yeah, we haven't seen each other for a year, but oh wow, we're so close that we sat down for coffee today and I feel like we were talking just yesterday. But still, we do think that I need to, at the very least, message. I need to make some kind of an effort. With our parents, after we leave the nest, we make some kind of effort to keep in touch, to go for that Sunday lunch all together. But with our partners, we think if they love me unconditionally, if we had this family built on our love, this love should just hold us through this tough time, romanticizing that we don't actually need to really do something, which in itself starts to erode the relationship because we start to feel like they are taking us for granted and we are taking them for granted. So in this case, we really need to start to think, how can I rediscover this person? And so that's why I talk about matrescence and patrescence a lot, to normalize that your partner is changing. If you think you know her or you know him, You don't. And if you thought you discovered everything, you didn't. But now, especially, they are changing. Be curious about that. Try to reconnect.
Well, and reconnect over the hard topics, which is how are you feeling about being a father or a mother? How are you feeling about being a parent or a partner as a new parent? I mean, I don't think I would have had, well, I certainly wouldn't have had the knowledge to do that, but I would have also been frightened, I think, to ask those questions or to answer those questions, even with somebody who I was deeply in love with.
Right. Because I wonder, what does it mean if I tell my partner that, oh my God, I don't know. Sometimes I regret having become a mom, for example. And do I know how he's going to receive this? Or will he think I'm a bad mother? Will he think I'm unfit? Will he start to be scared while I'm home with the baby alone? So these are the types of conversations that we fear having and then we avoid having. Another pitfall that would go to a later stage would be that I believe we are going to be the same way that we were, even though we didn't work on the relationship. But now that our kids have grown, now I'm trying to spend more time with you. And oh my God, who are you? And so again, we think that you've changed, and we say that as if it's a bad thing. And this change starts to become a reason to grow even further apart, to feel betrayed that you've changed. And so the pitfall is, I don't think there's a way out of here. I don't think there needs to be work. We just need to rely on that love. And if it was there, we should have been just fine.
You know, I think you talked about those three pitfalls, and what you kept coming back to, I think the underlying simple remedy is that you still have to have that same curiosity about your partner. It's almost like looking at it as that first date. You know how exciting it is to have a first date or a second date when you're newly in love. It's almost like you have to put on that type of a aura to say, oh, I am going to be looking at my husband or wife as a new opportunity or person as we're growing together. Let me be curious instead of relying that, you know, the man that I married when I was 27 is going to be the same man that I'm married to at 53.
Right. Exactly. I love the way that you put it. And it's actually way simpler than we think it's going to be. We think it's going to take so much effort. And if I wanted to be on a new date, I would be dating someone else and getting the excitement of meeting someone else. But I don't want that. I want to be able to rely on the fact that I know who I married, and I can at the very least not have to deal with that right now. But what we don't realize is that it's actually much more detrimental to even our own psychology when we refuse to do this, because you are not working on a relationship that actually has the potential to make or break your own psychology. So even from a very selfish standpoint, if I don't work on my relationship with my partner, it's going to affect my own psychology. Relationships have the capacity to either help us really grow or to cause us to get into depression. There are studies that show that people who live longer are not necessarily so much healthier. They're not necessarily eating better. They're not necessarily doing all these things that we expect to hear, but they're people in healthy relationships. So life expectancy is always linked to healthier relationships. Of course, everything else also helps. Taking care of our body and exercising and eating right and sleeping, all these things help. But the one factor that has always come up in studies is being in a good relationship, in a good partnership. And we don't give enough attention to that anymore. We actually pride ourselves in the fact that I gave myself to my children, not realizing that this is not good for the children either. They need to be able to see that you have a healthy relationship with yourself and with your partner. That is also a good example for them.
Well, I think showing them how difficult life can be, and then also showing them tenacity and resilience, and that life is not perfect, teaches them so much more as well.
And not to give up at the first struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. You know, we had two children that had gone through, we had very difficult years for several years. And I think when you said we get task oriented, That's exactly what we did. We compartmentalized and we became task oriented. And it was just like, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. I may fill you in on some of the tasks, but I'm not necessarily going to fill you in on the emotions that went with those tasks. I'm not going to tell you about how hard my day was trying to help my son through something. I'm just going to tell you that we went to the doctor today or whatever. And for many years, my husband and I were on, two different planes. It's kind of what it was. Luckily for us, we had COVID that came and all of a sudden now it put us into the same box, right? And so we were able then to talk. We had to talk more about tasks, or less about tasks and more about real things, because we were experiencing them together. And again, for us, it was a blessing. We were able to get through that and have those very hard conversations. But, that was where we really fell back in love, was once we started to be curious, the good and the bad about each other, and then started talking about how we grew.
Right. Sharing your experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it was hard because you're very vulnerable. And once you've got years and years of, hardships and those kind of things, you then become less and less willing, I think, to share. And it becomes harder to share and connect.
Yes. We also grow rough around the edges when we experience life that way. And I think a part of it is also that if I am sharing with you just the tasks that we have to do, we're writing on different planes, I may be keeping from you my experience and my feelings, but at the same time, the fact that you are not making, at least in my opinion, from my perspective, you're not making the effort to come to me and ask me, why do you no longer share? It starts to make me feel that you don't care. And so it's very difficult at some point to say, okay, I need to share these things with you, because we have the ego and we have our pride that says, well, they should have made the first step. And that gets into the mix as well. And so how easy is it at some point to be able to say, hey, when I was going through this, it was very, very rough for me, to just say it like that and not put blame and say, and you never came forward to ask me. Did you not wonder whether it was hard for me? Did I have to beg for your attention? There are a lot of things that come into play. And for what I have come to uncover is that a lot of times this happens because of inner child wounds, or the mother wound or the father wound, things that have happened to us in childhood years that have traumatized us in either a small or a big way that we haven't necessarily addressed. And parenthood is going to bring them forward. So even for those that may have been in therapy, may have thought that they healed, parenthood is going to bring back things and trigger things that we never thought were there or we thought we dealt with. And our inner child is going to really come to the surface for the things that it feels it hasn't ever received from our parent self. So if we haven't reparented our inner child, there are a lot of things that we're going to see come forward as we deal with our children and as we deal with our partner.
Wow. You need to write a book.
Thank you.
You really do.
Meanwhile,
you need
I've been told that before, and I always wonder, and what would I say? It's been told before.
Oh, you have a lot to say. You have a lot to say. I'll be your editor. Although my spelling's not that good anymore, so maybe you don't want me as an editor, but you really do. I mean, I'm kind of on the other side. I'm, now that empty nest syndrome. And so I can look back, and we have this saying in our family, whenever we would have arguments or we would have anything, it was an opportunity for growth. What can we do? How can we grow from this? But there are a lot of opportunities for growth in relationships and parenting. And again, I feel very lucky and blessed that we made it through that, the last 20 somewhat years, because it was so difficult. But if somebody could have even some of the little bit of insight that you're giving beforehand to say, we all know it's going to be hard, but it's not hard because we're not sleeping enough or whatever, it's hard because we are changing as people, and that's okay. And then being tired on top of it makes it even more difficult.
Exactly.
But if you could just have a little bit of insight beforehand, I think it would make a huge difference in the way that we approach parenting and partnerhood, is what I would say.
Yes, definitely. And that's how I got into this. So I became very, very passionate about matrescence and then patrescence as well. And in the beginning, my desire and my passion was to work with women who were expecting. And what I really wanted was to help them feel a little bit more prepared to handle the emotional aspect. Exactly what you said before, what to expect when you're expecting, it's all child-centered, and no wonder why then mothers become very child-centered and they refuse to actually give themselves support. I have come as far as to believe that we don't want to give that to ourselves, because if we do, it means we're bad mothers. If I take my attention away from the child and I give myself support, it means that I'm not as self-sacrificial as the mother archetype is supposed to be. On top of, it basically means I am accepting and I am admitting and I'm making it real that I am not always joyful in motherhood. So if I go and I see someone about the emotional struggles that I'm having in motherhood, what does that say about me as a mother? To that professional and to me, first and foremost to me, what am I admitting to myself? And so for these reasons, a lot of women will refuse after having the baby to seek support. But even before, I started offering a service where I would help women kind of get a little bit of insight into matrescence and what is bound to happen. And especially for first-time moms, because as I said, the other moms that are not first-time moms wouldn't come because of the guilt and the shame involved. But for first-time expecting women, it was really like I was attempting to blow their bubble. It felt awful. And they didn't want to believe it. It's not going to happen to me because I've read about this. It's not going to happen to me because I am prepared. It's not going to happen to me because I am a go-getter and I'm ambitious and I'm strong and I will be able to handle it. I get it. Other women can't, but that's not me. And it felt like I was trying to convince them about something. And that's not my character. I don't want to blow anybody's bubble. I'm very happy with your happiness and I don't want to ruin it because it felt like it was coming across to them as though I was trying to, or that I was trying to question their ability. And so I very quickly shifted gears toward helping mothers who are already in this matrescence journey and are feeling like they need support. But then I ran into the problem I said before, and where I started working with couples is when these mothers really just started bringing their partners along. And that is much more socially acceptable, even though we don't really want to talk about our relationship problems. At the same time, it's much more socially acceptable to focus on saving my marriage because we are very concerned about children coming from divorced families. And although it's much more common now, all of us are much more inclined to say, at least if I am going to get divorced, I at least want to feel that I gave it my best shot, that I did this for my kids. And so this self-sacrificial thing kicks in, but I am saving my children if I am trying to save my marriage. And so this is kind of where it becomes a little bit more acceptable to seek help. And that's why I created a program where I really wanted to work with the mom and the dad to deal with matrescence and patrescence, but they were coming to me as a couple. And so what I do with couples is that I see them together, but I also see them apart. And so one week I'll see them together in a session. And the next week I am going to see them, the wife alone and the husband alone. And we're going to deal with their inner wounds and their child trauma, potential generational trauma, things that need to be healed on their end, vulnerabilities that they may not be ready at all to share in the couple session and may take months and months to share, because I don't want to, start to become so vulnerable and show my wound in front of you and use this time to deal with my things and for you to see it open up right there in front of you. I want to deal with it and then maybe bring it forward and become psychologically prepared to bring it forward. And this is why this has been helping. And that is the long answer. And I also wanted to comment on something else that you said that I found very interesting. You say that there are a lot of opportunities to grow. And there are a lot of couples who see these opportunities for growth, the way that you perceive them, as opportunities to check more boxes that we are not meant for each other. And so this is a matter of perception and of mindset. And a lot of couples that come to me, we need to work on changing that mindset and that perception that, oh, this happened and it proves to me that we're so different. That happened and it proves to me that we don't have the same values. How are we raising children together? Whereas for you, it is, oh, this is an opportunity for growth. Let me understand you and let me help you understand me, and we can grow together. So yes, you are blessed, but you also made an effort. It's not just luck. You're not just lucky. You're not just blessed. You actually put the work in, and you made sure to nurture your mindset in such a way that it nurtured the relationship.
But that's a hard thing to do, too. It's so much easier. I'll be honest. It's so much easier to put on my own hat and just go down my own lane and ignore everything else around me. But it's not as healthy. Now, as you were talking about that transition into motherhood, feelings for me were coming up about when my kids got really sick. And all of those feelings that you were talking about were repeated when my kids got really, really sick. And I had, for a period of time, I had higher needs children. And you talk about there's no time for caring for myself, that it's selfish to do that there's a guilty standpoint of trying to care for yourself. I didn't really realize, I don't think, that pattern can repeat itself over the course of parenthood. And when you have a child or children that have higher needs, that feeling returns and is a lot of times exponentially larger than it was when they were born, because in birth, there is some sort of joy. But when your child is sick, there is terror, but then there's also this guilt that goes along with it when you start thinking that this isn't what parenthood's supposed to be about. Or I just wish I could be alone and, go for a drive to the beach. But now I have to take care of this child who's higher needs. There's all these guilty feelings that you experience and that also aren't talked about, or at least in my case, weren't talked about with my spouse. And I'm sure it's probably true with a lot of other partners out there.
Yes, and you're describing a very difficult situation. And there is, it's not a coincidence that there are a lot of couples who have at least one higher needs child that end up separating, because it puts a lot of stress on us personally and then on the couple, of course. And we have to find ways to deal with it. And a lot of times we can't communicate about what it is that we're feeling. A lot of times these unspoken feelings, because I feel so shameful about the fact that, oh my God, why me? Why do I have to deal with this? We can't say that out loud. How often can a person say this out loud? Even in support groups, how easy is it for people to express these kinds of things? But at the very least, there is that opportunity. But not everyone will go, and not everyone will have their partner come with them. And so all of these unspoken feelings that make me feel awful and turn against myself, because maybe I'm not telling you, but I know that I'm feeling them and I feel awful about the fact that I'm feeling them. I feel guilt for thinking these things as I look at my child and know that I am blessed to have them, and it could have been way worse, for example, but here I am thinking, why me? Then imagine how that feels for the person that's experiencing this, and then not being able to, at the very least, express this to your partner, because this is what partnership is, that I am allowed not to vomit my emotions, but to be able to have you hold them for me, to trust that I can say them and you can hold them, and you can say what you're feeling and I can hold it for you, and we can figure out a way instead of judge each other. But even for couples that may not have a child that's higher needs, or they may not know yet because the child is a newborn, even in these stages, there are those feelings of, I want to go back I regret becoming a mom or a dad. I really don't like this. I don't know that I was meant for this. And the sheer fact that we can't express this to one another will then create distance, because if it may not be true, but if I think that you as my partner can't hold this, if I am worried that you are going to judge me, just this perception of you and the way that I can relate to you starts to erode on our relationship.
So what are some, without going to therapy right away, or if they're not able to, what are some communication techniques or ideas that you can give to help kickstart these conversations for couples?
It's actually way easier than is being described. So I get very angry when I hear self-care, for example.
Okay.
That's one thing that irks me. I use self-connect because self-care, a lot of times on the internet, you're going to find things that seem so unrealistic. Like, before you can take care of the relationship, you need to take care of yourself. Here are some self-care examples. And then they give examples that realistically most moms or dads will not be able to do with their schedule, but especially moms. And so then it starts to feel like, oh, if this is what I need to do, and if this is being proposed, then obviously other people are able to do it. If it's proposed left and right, I'm going to make the assumption that a lot of people are following this advice. I feel like we're doomed to fail. So number one, don't necessarily follow self-care routines that don't feel realistic to you, but do make sure that you connect with yourself. Before we ever get to kickstarting the relationship with our partner, we need to make sure we're tending to our own, to ourself, and to the relationship that we have with ourself. If it is feeling strained, putting in the effort in terms of the couple is not going to really work. Instead, I might actually just feel resentment that I have to work on the relationship. If you were a better partner and if you made the effort yourself, then maybe I wouldn't have to deal with this. I'm dealing with the baby all day and I'm dealing with my own turmoil and guilt and shame that I can't express to you. And now really I have to put in the effort to be curious about you and ask about your day and about your feelings. Really just get out of here. So the first step would be to start to question, how do I feel about me? About how I'm changing. Who am I now? If I am no longer, for example, for me, one thing was I was always this very ambitious person who did a lot of things, and I still am. I'm finding parts of my old self where, we never go back, but we can redefine certain things and rediscover old parts and bring them to this new reality, and then get a better sense of who we want to be and who we are within parenthood. But in the beginning, when I didn't know how to do this, and I was really trying to go back to who I used to be, and I started finding a person that felt so much guilt and shame when I never did before, a person who felt lost and felt tired when I really just never allowed myself. It's not that I was never tired and exhausted. It's just that I suppressed it so much that I felt like I always had the energy to do a lot of things. But this is where motherhood can either be a curse or a blessing, because in the beginning, I saw that as a curse. What's happened to me? Why am I so exhausted? What's wrong with me? Whereas what was really happening is motherhood was giving me an invitation to take care of parts that I never allowed to rest, to listen to parts that were saying, hey, we're dying here. We need time to rest, and it's not going to be a hit on your identity. You're not weak and you're not incapable or stupid if you cannot handle certain things, because it's not that you can't handle them. You just need to take rest. And so that is the first step that I would suggest to kick back the relationship. And that in a practical sense, you could start it by journaling. You don't have to necessarily go to therapy, but you could start journaling. And that's why on my podcast, I always make sure that as I'm talking about these things, about matrescence, patrescence, the relationship and the children and raising them, I always make sure to leave a journaling exercise, because what I'm hoping that as somebody listens and finds this useful, they can actually take a step toward healing themselves and their relationship. And then for the couple, setting a realistic goal. So a date night every week may sound very daunting. And even if I can make the time for it, maybe I do have the support, maybe we are at the stage where it just feels very scary. we could just go at each other's throats if we have a date night. And I really don't want to do that. And so I present a lot of practical issues when I really just fear that if we get to talking, we are probably just going to have such a huge fight that we can never go back from it. So instead, why not have a 10-minute weekly check-in? And it might seem like nothing, but if I make sure to structure those 10 minutes where there's nothing logistics related being discussed, and I ask you actively, what is something that you're thinking about lately? How are you feeling? What is something that you might need and I can support you with? I ask you. I don't expect you to tell me. And then maybe you feel like, oh, you didn't make an effort. I had to beg. But I ask you. And then you do the same for me. Just these 10 minutes where I don't feel like we can just get into a big, even put a timer. We can't get into a very big argument. If there's a timer and it's over, I can feel the safety that we can just say, oh, okay. And we can stop the conversation, but we made the effort to check in. For some couples who feel more ready, it can be a 5-minute check-in every day or every other day, right before the one person goes to work and the other person takes the kids to school. So right before the kids wake up or right after the kids have gone to bed, over a cup of chamomile or tea or whatever it is, before you turn on Netflix or something that is going to make you feel like we are spending time together, but we're not really connecting. We're really avoiding the tough conversations. Before that, can we have these 5 minutes where we just ask, how are you feeling? What's going on with you? These are very, very simple and seem very, very small. And so we don't believe that they will help and we don't engage. But at the same time, when we look at these grand strategies that are suggested elsewhere, we feel like we're going to drown if we try them. So I always invite couples to take very small steps because they are going to make a difference and they're going to prepare us to take those bigger steps later on.
Markella, I think I could go on for hours. You have got such great insight. Where can people hear more from you?
Well, they can find me on Instagram at markella.kaplani, Markella with a double L. And they can find me on markellakaplani.com on my website. And my podcast, if you put a /podcast, you can find the podcast, or it is called the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. So you can find it anywhere where you listen to your podcast. Oh, and even YouTube. So now I have a YouTube channel and there's even a video version. So those are the main places where you can find me.
Markella, thank you so much. This was so insightful.
Thank you as well. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor.
Thanks for tuning in to This Way Up. I hope you're feeling a little lighter, a little brighter, and ready to take on whatever comes next. Remember, the journey of mental health is all about progress, not perfection. So keep climbing, and don't forget to celebrate the small wins. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could use a little lift.